Hello and welcome. I am so grateful for all of the lovely comments that I received on my 1917 sweater video, and I had a few people asking how to make the stitch that was used in that project, so here we are. The stitch is actually pretty simple. I found it quite enjoyable to make once I really got a flow going. If you know how to make a single crochet, if you know how to make a puff stitch, you got this. It's going to be real easy for you. I have once again linked the original pattern in the description below. It does include written instructions for this stitch if you'd like to check that out for yourself. So they call this stitch a block stitch, but this is not like any block stitch that I have seen before. It's definitely not the block stitch that is commonly used in modern crochet patterns. I have never seen this stitch anywhere else before, but if you have, I would love to hear about it in the comments because I'm really curious to see if there are other patterns out there that utilize this stitch or if maybe it goes by a different name these days. Before we jump into the tutorial, I do want to share a few tips about materials for this stitch. If you watched my 1917 sweater video, you know that I had a hell of a time finding the right yarn for this stitch. So please, learn from my mistakes. Don't torture yourself. Tip number 1, find a yarn that does not split easily. Splitty yarn is never a good time, but it's especially not a good time with this stitch. You will be pulling your hook through several loops at once, so there is a higher chance than usual that your hook might catch on something that you don't want it to. Tip number 2, use tightly spun, untextured yarn. This is not the stitch for roving yarns or anything furry, fuzzy, or otherwise fun and unusual. Plain, smooth fibers are going to be your friend here. This tip is not only for ease of stitching, but also to use this stitch to what I think is its best advantage. For me, the appeal of this stitch is the distinct grid-like pattern that it produces, and I think that might get lost if you use anything that has any kind of halo or otherwise more texture to it. Tip number 3, I suggest using a solid colored light to medium toned yarn for this stitch. This one is purely an aesthetic opinion on my part, but again, I think the star of this show is the texture that this stitch produces, and you get that texture from the contrast of the highlights on the raised edges of the stitches and those deeper shadows in the recessed areas. That is not always possible with darker yarns, unless there's something shiny, that might work. But if it's kind of a matte, darker yarn, you lose some of that contrast, especially in the highlights, and it tends to flatten things out. For the same reason, I would also not recommend using variegated yarns for this stitch. Gradient yarns would probably look really nice if you have something that has long, slow color transitions, but personally, I wouldn't recommend anything that was intended for planned pooling or any more chaotic color effects. I'm just afraid that the texture of this stitch would easily get lost among more frequent color changes. With that out of the way, grab your hook and I will show you how to make this stitch. Alright, so this pattern is made up by alternating rows of single crochets and the block stitch, starting with single crochet. So I already made my single crochet row so we can get right into the block stitch tutorial. So I'm going to chain 2 and turn, and then this will be my starting. This chain here is going to be a single crochet. You're always going to end and start a row of block stitch with single crochet, and then we are going to make a single crochet in the next stitch. And here's where we get into the block stitch. So to do this stitch, you're going to yarn over, and instead of inserting it into another stitch, you are going to make it around the post of the single crochet that you just made. So this space right here is where you're going to insert your hook. And it is helpful to keep loose tension, otherwise it's going to be really fun trying to pull your hook through. So insert it around that post of the stitch you just made, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then you're going to do that again. So yarn over, back around the post of the previous stitch, pull up a loop, do it better than I did. And now you should have 5 loops on your hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then now you are going to yarn over again and pull it through all 5 loops on your hook. This is again why having yarn that doesn't split and semi-loose tension is really, really helpful. So now we have kind of this sideways puff stitch going on here. You are going to skip the next stitch and just make a single crochet in the stitch after that. And that is our first block stitch. So now we're going to do that again. You're just going to keep doing the block stitch around the post of the single crochets that you made to finish the last stitch. So I'll show you again. Yarn over, insert it around the post of your single crochet, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up another loop, yarn over one more time, pull through all 5 loops on your hook, skip the next stitch and single crochet in the stitch after that. There you go. And you just keep repeating this until the end of your row. So yarn over, insert your hook around the post, pull up a loop, yarn over, around the post, pull up a loop, through all 5, skip the next stitch, single crochet in the stitch after that. And we're going to keep going till the end of the row. Now that you've gone to the end of the row, you're going to make your final single crochet in the last stitch. I'm just going to leave that one alone. So now we have our row of block stitches here. You'll notice that one side is going to be much more pronounced than the other. This side is going to be a little bit flatter. So now that you have your first row of block stitches, you're going to put a row of single crochets on top of this row. And this is where you're going to be crocheting in every stitch. So do 2 and turn. So you're going to insert your hook in the top of the block stitch. And then in between the stitch, basically in between block stitches as well. So this loop between them if you stretch it a little bit. So you always want to have the same number of single crochets in every row, obviously unless you're making something that needs to be increased or decreased. Right, so I have my second row of single crochets, so I'm going to go in with another row of the block stitch. So chain 2 and turn, single crochet in that first stitch, yarn over, loop your hook around, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 5 loops, skip your stitch, single crochet in the next stitch, and on we go. And once you get a couple rows going is when you can really start to see the grid pattern emerging. And that's all there is to it. It's a pretty easy stitch. Like I said, if you know how to make a puff stitch, you know how to make a single crochet, you should have no problem with this. Just remember to alternate rows of single crochet and block stitch, and happy crocheting. If you enjoyed this tutorial, maybe give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel if you would like to see more historical and vintage crochet projects as well as sewing and other crafting content. Until then, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye!